Good afternoon, everyone. Some of you know me, but many don't. So I'll just introduce myself. I'm Aviva Dorch. I am now very excited to be the scholar in residence at the Jewish Voices programme here in Wolfson as part of the Oxford Centre for Life Writing. The amazing philanthropist Vera Brzezinski-Fine, who some of you would have heard talk about Peggy Guggenheim a couple of months ago, has founded this programme to investigate Jewish women's lives and creative output in all forms of written, visual, musical, creative arts. And we're really delighted that as part of that, there is this seminar series happening. So Dr. Kate Kennedy, who is the director of the Centre for Life Writing, asked me if I would introduce today's seminar and introduce our speakers, Amanda and Devorah. But in order to do that, I'm actually going to have to talk about my real job. So this, for me, being here is a pleasure and a vocation and a chance to write myself. But in the kind of real world, if there is a real world outside these walls, I'm the publisher of a magazine called Jewish Renaissance, which is the arts and cultural quarterly for the UK's Jewish community. And in fact, we're the leading English language arts publication now for the Jewish world in Europe. And we reach America as well. So I'm very excited about that. And about 18 months ago, the art historian Monica Bone-Dushan, who writes for us, came to me and said, "There's someone I need you to meet." And I'll say something about Monica because actually she's going to be the speaker for our seminar next term. Her mother was the photographer Dorothy Baum, who was a very close friend of Lee Miller. She was a refugee and she was one of the founders of the Photographers Gallery in London. So we're very excited to be looking at that. And in fact, Dorothy Baum's exhibition will be held at Farley's Farm, Lee Miller's home, next April. So Oxford is getting a preview, which is very exciting. But Monica is someone I hugely respect and trust as a photographer, and indeed looking at film as well. And she said, "There's someone you've got to meet." And we were talking about it just before, and we think it was about 18 months ago. I had lunch with Amanda, and she told us about this project she was doing on Charlotte Beradt. And it's so exciting to actually hear now, not only has the book been published, but the film is underway. So Amanda Rubin, is a documentary filmmaker. She's a journalist and an independent scholar. She works at the intersection of cultural history, music, the arts, and science. So an amazing cross-cultural breadth of knowledge. Her credits as a filmmaker include 21st Century Mythologies, which looks at mythologies by Roland Barthes, dance works for BBC4, and programmes for The Late Show, for BBC Two, documentary for Sky, The Unexplained for the History Channel, and many other credits as a filmmaker. So when I first spoke to Amanda all that time ago, she was researching a film which is now in the process of being made about the journalist Charlotte Beradt and this unique dream collection, the Third Reich of Dreams. But in doing that research, she realised that there was this book there that needed to be published, that needed to be retranslated. And she's really been the mover and shaker driving this publication by Princeton University Press forward. And I don't know if any of you see, Laura Feigl reviewed it for us and wrote a fantastic article. But there was something like 13-page article by Zadie Smith in the New York Review of Books championing this, and The Economist has chosen it as one of the best books of 2025. So it's really exciting we're getting to hear about it today. In conversation with Amanda is going to be Professor Devorah Baum from Southampton University. And again, Devorah has huge breadth. She's published on Jewish identity, she's published on Jewish humour, she's also published on interior lives and made films about kind of, for a life writing centre, it's perfect, about what the role of marriage is. She's co-directed, I believe, with your husband, films about pregnancy, and there's one in fact called Husband. So that intersection of the arts of documentary filmmaking, of Jewish identity, and also a really rich research kind of portfolio career of literature, philosophy, theory, makes her the ideal person to be in conversation with Amanda. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Devorah, and we look forward to hearing you this afternoon.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Can you all hear me if this is just down here on the table? Great, so I don't have to hold the handheld microphone. It's a really good demonstration there so this is a seminar on life writing, and I really want us to hone in on that aspect of our conversation. It's a really good demonstration there, hearing your life described and thinking, is that me? Is that my life? My life seems a lot messier than it sounds when I'm introduced, but thank you for that, because it's nice to hear it that way. I don't know how many here have read this book, but I really hope, if you haven't yet, that you will find a copy and do so, because I think this is one of the extraordinary books that have been published, and we really owe Amanda a huge debt of thanks for getting this new translation out and bringing it back. It won't have escaped your notice that looking at the interior lives of people living under totalitarianism has a certain kind of resonance now. And I think there's a reason why this book is speaking to people now, people who feel very haunted by historical echoes in various ways, and who are perhaps paying attention to their own interior lives and their dreams in a different way right now. But we're going to focus, so we're going to think about dreams actually together, and what kind of life writing, dream writing is, or what kind of life story a dream tells as we move through our conversation together. But I wanted actually to begin with your life, Amanda, and to ask you to describe a little bit about what in your life led you to, how do I pronounce Beradt? Berat's life. What led you, if you could begin by bringing your story into how you took on Berat's story, that'd be where I'd like to begin. Thank you.
Sure, the messy version.
I want the messy version.
My life story.
With the ring. With the
ring.
Yeah.
Well, I came back into filmmaking. I'd been a filmmaker in my early, my early career, and then I stopped to have a family and I raised kids, and in the last sort of 7, 8, 10 years, I sort of wanted to come back. I felt like I had more stories I wanted to tell, and sort of lucky in a way. It's harder as an older woman to come back into that profession, but I had a few successes, and I was able to start making films again, and then the pandemic hit, and I had started to think about a film about dreams. I'd come across a story that was kind of interesting, so I was already slightly immersed in dreams. But somebody sent me an article in the New Yorker called "How Dreams Change Under Authoritarianism," and somehow it really captured me. It was the story of this book and the author Charlotte, and something about the way we were inhabiting lockdown, what was coming out of the White House and China and our own government, something about the way we were having to conform, something about our powerlessness, and yet also a kind of normalcy about, we still had to buy milk, walk the dog, do the washing, the sun shone, birds tweeted, the blossoms came out, everything was kind of normal on one level and super hyper, heightened on another. And there was something about the story of this unique dream collection, which was about a period of time that we all think we knew about. and I thought I knew and understood the history of it, but this was interrogating it or reflecting or exposing it at a level that I hadn't really thought about. And it resonated with my own family history of escaping the Nazis in just before the war. Many didn't escape, but my own family escaped. So knowing that history, and yet not really having had a chance to understand the kind of everyday of that. What was it like? Sort of broken down. How was that experience in the interior of having to escape? So this book somehow spoke to that, and I was also just drawn as I began to research the story for a film. I was drawn to the kind of arc of her story and how she had get into her, but you know, this sort of about finding her voice in her late period and when she published this book, and so there was some sort of parallel with me finding my voice and she finding hers.
So it's so interesting that you're saying that in a way you came to this book because actually the world was forcing you into the interior in one way or another. You were forced inside, and you started to inspect elements not just of your own history but of your family history, and wondered what they were doing inside you. And then again, that you mentioned that lunch that we just had, that in a way the arc of the story you are interested in telling, both about yourself and about Charlotte, is that way in which we talk about somebody looking to find their own voice, as if this sort of, this isn't a given. Your own voice is something that comes at the end of the story. Can you tell me how that works both for you and Charlotte?
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't really had to think about it. That's really interesting to be asked that question. I think I really had a sense like that I had more story in me, and I didn't want to just bow out, having done what I'd done, which were great things, but it was like, no, there's more creativity, there's more about the world that I want to say or explore. In Charlotte's case, she was a kind of prolific journalist in Weimar in the 1920s, really one of the most prolific and sort of emancipated sort of sense of this period of exploration of a kind of utopian socialist vision. There was so much excitement around. And her journey was that the war came. Hitler was elected. She was barred from being a journalist, and so her whole world was just dampened by the kind of clouds of war and then displacement. And so it was only years later that she found her way out again, and sort of somehow inadvertently. She didn't really set out to publish this. She just buried these dreams that she collected, and she was trying, in fact, to publish her husband's novel over and over and over again. She was trying to get his novel published, and then somehow hers got, and then she became a kind of cultural commentator. So suddenly she was out in the world again, talking about it, being able to share her.
When she was in America.
Yeah.
I thought that I don't know how many people here had heard of her before this book or this session, but I had heard of her because I'd heard of her as a good friend of Hannah Arendt's. I'd heard that she did Hannah Arendt's hair, that she was Hannah Arendt's hairdresser. And I had heard of these dreams. I never thought I'd read them. I mean, it's so extraordinary to suddenly be in possession of the book in which these things I'd heard about in the margins of other books had been sort of loosely discussed. But what I hadn't also understood until I spoke to you was that she and Hannah Arendt were sharing an awful lot, actually. Do you want to talk about her relationship with Arendt and what was going on there? Because it seems like an interesting context.
Sure. I was just going to just give just a bit more of the story, in the sense that there she was, this was prolific journalist. She was writing about women's new professions. She was writing about, she translated Charlie Chaplin's Hello Europe. She was really at that kind of epicenter of this exciting moment in European history of arts and culture, and the sort of new possibilities that as a communist she was really excited by. But in the 30s, banned from working, she began to collect dreams, and she sent them out of Germany as letters abroad. She wrote them in code. She secretly asked people. She sent them abroad, and she left and went to America in the late 30s and set up this hair salon. And she talks about it as a sort of salon in two senses, and people describe it as the most literary of salons. And Bella Chagall, Marc Chagall's wife, was there, and actresses and writers and photographers, and this heartbeat of New York Jewish intellectual life was there. In the evenings, they would move the tables aside. I mean, she just had a little basement, corner of her basement apartment. But they were destitute, they didn't have money, and this was just a way, which for almost 20 years, besides meeting Arendt and beginning to translate for her and trying to make a career as a translator, but finding that hard, and then assisting Arendt in running her office for her. But she also rekindled this relationship with Arendt's husband, Heinrich Blücher, who was her teacher in the early 20s in the Communist Party. And so I think he was notoriously, I don't know, man of the world, but that relationship continued when they re-met. But they were very close. Charlotte supported her a lot in her work. There are lots of letters between her and Arendt about the Eichmann trial, about all sorts of day-to-day admin things, and also lots of gossip about their community. So that there was a.
And she was the executor on her estate, or yeah.
I don't
No, oh, no?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right,
But
okay.
not sure.
I've added that to the story. So it's interesting that the hair. I mean, I don't know. It is the case, I think, that people sometimes use their hairdressers as shrinks. That I mean, there's that thing of. I mean, you're not on a sofa, but there's somebody there who just seems forced to listen to you, should you so wish, to monologue, and they just ask the odd question and to keep it going, and it's roughly 50 minutes in the seat. I think there is something about these kinds of professions that does invite another kind of conversation, another kind of way of interacting. So I'm interested in the hair salon, but and also in the fact that she was living a life of the collective. I mean, not just sharing husbands or whatever, but living with these sort of collective life, because there is a real tension in her work between the idea of the individual and whether or not the individual exists or should exist or can exist at all. And she draws some of that from thinking through totalitarian ideas through Arendt, but she's also a really strong rejecter of Freudianism and the psychoanalytic interpretation of dreams, which I find interesting too. So I want to move our conversation into this dream space, and I'd like to approach it in various ways. And one of the ways I'd like to approach it is by asking if you've had any good dreams recently that you want to share with the class.
Yeah, I had a dream. I sort of mentioned, I didn't tell you what it was, but I mentioned that a little bit after October 7th, very soon after, actually, maybe 3 weeks or a month after, I dreamt that I was directing, I was in an attic room. I was directing a sort of photo shoot. And there was just a kind of bed, almost like a hospital bed, empty next to me. And at the end of the bed were a few young people, including my daughter, my youngest daughter, who was naked. And I kept going and trying to, she was naked, but she had a shirt on, but it was open. I kept trying to go and close the shirt, try to close the shirt. next to me was standing a woman, the woman who had been released from, so it was just, she was one of the first people to have been released. And she was wearing that green caftan that I remember seeing. I don't know if any of you remember it, but in the footage, she was released from captivity quite soon. She was wearing this amazing, very bright green caftan. It was the same green as the Hamas, her captors had on there. And there was a moment where she shook the hand of the guy, and it was just such a powerful kind of moment of I don't know, recognition, unity, respect, something that was so enormously powerful. So she was standing next to me, and then behind me was my mother, totally different, and the twin set, Charles, bag. And she said, I'm going now. And I was like, oh, you can't go, you know, it's midnight and it's Brixton and you can't get back to Golders Green. We're in Brixton. And she said, but I'm leaving, I'm going now. And I said, oh, it's like, oh, stop, shoot, I'm going to have to drive you. And anyway, that was it. But I took it to my therapist, and she said, the first thing she said to me was, what's Brixton? And it was so brilliant, sort of opening up it. And I would never have thought that would be the question she might ask me. But what Brixton meant to me was multiculturalism, the kind of sharing of ideas, and a city. And that's what I love about London. It's what Charlotte loved, I think, about the world she inhabited. She was deeply assimilated. She thought about herself as German. And she wrote in her later life about finding her voice. She wrote about civil rights leaders. She wrote about bookshops in Harlem. She really immersed herself in all sorts of communities. But anyway, for me, Brixton represented that. And this war, this was beginning, was, I could sort of maybe read, or somehow know that this was going to create sort of a collision of culture. And I learned later that the woman standing there, her name was Lifshitz, and my family name was Lipschitz. And I only recognized that like 6 months later, or a year later. That's my family name, or maybe slightly changed. So that was kind of profound, the way that I brought these elements into my life.
That's a beautiful answer to my question, and I feel you dreamed it for me. But I mean, one thing that we can think about, and which is so interesting, is when Charlotte puts these dreams together, she says the reason she's decided to collect them is so that they'll serve as evidence against the Nazis, should the period of terror ever come to an end, which is an extraordinary way to think about dreams. Here is your evidence of Nazism. Here's what people were dreaming. And I mean, what I heard just then when you described a dream was a kind of evidence along Charlotte's lines that dreams are haunted by history, geography, politics, and also the very personal concern to protect your own daughter, you know, that to cover, to wish you didn't have, that she wasn't exposed to these intergenerational traumas and associations that are sort of stopping your shoot, or causing your own focus to go awry. Do you have, would you say, a theory of dreams of your own?
I mean, I'm sure there's very eminent people here who are more, you know, better skilled and learned to talk to dream theory itself. What I really love about this book, and what I find fascinating, is it sits at the intersection of kind of history and psychology and dream theory and cultural theory and literary theory. You know, it's this place where, and it's kind of slightly malleable within that, because you can bring all sorts of lenses to it. I think dreams, and the more I've interrogated and understood it, dreams are such a kind of rich and fertile place that, you know, humans imagine it. We talked a little bit about writing and why we write, you know, why people write. But I think we write and we create and we direct in our dreams. You know, that the sort of human imagination is so expansive and so profound. And so I think dreams, you know, they're part day residue, and they're part, and Charlotte talks about them as an attempt, these dreams, and as an attempt to express the inexplicable. And to explain the inexplicable. But I just wanted to quote a historian, a German historian, who in the 70s wrote as an afterword to the second edition in German of this book. And he says, dreams belong to the realm of human fiction. They do not offer a realistic representation of reality, but they shed a particularly harsh light on the reality from which they originate. Precisely their poetic qualifier. It's precisely their poetic quality that allows us to extract statements from our source genre that cannot be obtained from factual reports. So in the sense, it's kind of very pure evidence, he's saying. It's a sort of, it's almost purer than anything that a historian can, as historians can come up with. And I thought that was kind of really, really profound as evidence. They are what Wilfred Bion, who was came after Freud, there's a kind of exploration of his work in the light of this. And I love the idea that something about the mapping of history onto the body, that that's what dreams are. Dreams are the meeting place where history and the body kind of meet. And I think that's an amazing way to think about it, you know, sort of records sort of etched into our psyche.
There's yeah, I really like that idea that history and the body meet in dreams. I mean, the really interesting rejection of Freud in this book is, I mean, there's a lot of ironies around that rejection of Freud in this book. One of the reasons Charlotte needs to reject a sort of psychoanalytic interpretation of dreams is this needs to be evidence of a real political history. And the moment you move into the psychoanalytic, you seem to be talking about individuals and personal histories and conflicts in the early years that have particular constellations within the family, and so on. And so for this to be evidence of Nazism and evidence of what it does to the psyche and what it does to the subject, there's no real space for that account, that these are the dreams of individuals. They have to be the dreams of people who've been denied their individuality by totalitarianism. So that's one of the reasons she rejects a Freudian interpretation of dreams. But what is extraordinarily fascinating about her own compilation of the dreams is that she, I mean, I'll read you a quote here from the book. She says, in order to record these dreams, she says, she to write them down, she was calling Hitler, Goering and Goebbels Uncle Hans, Uncle Gustav, Uncle Gerald. She was writing flu instead of arrest. I hid these bizarre sounding family stories in the spines of various books. I didn't have much hope that such pitiful methods would help me if worse came to worse, but what would? Later I sent the transcriptions to various addressees in various foreign countries as letters where they were waiting for me when I myself had to leave the country. So what she was doing in order to collect these dreams sounds like Freud's account of dreams. Freud's account of dreams is you change the names. You change the names because, you know, you're trying to escape the censors in your own mind. You hide them, you secrete them, you send them off to various addressees in the hope that you'll pick up the messages later. And so oddly, her own behavior in collecting dreams is very strangely akin to a kind of dream, if we're thinking psychoanalytically, as I want to do. So I think that one of the things that would be interesting for us to do together is to examine some of these dreams and think about Charlotte's interpretation of them, or which ones reverberate for you. Do you had a favorite couple of dreams or
Yeah,
two?
I mean, there's loads. I think one of the things, that drew me to them as a filmmaker is they're very sort of cinematic, they're like little stories, so they're very sort of complete in lots of ways. So there are loads of different ones, and I'm always interested in what other people, which dreams kind of come up for them. This is one that I haven't really. Did you want me to read one?
Yes, yeah. Well, particularly one that I think you feel touches you in some way.
Yeah. And there are loads of different ones, but I'm just going to go for this because I just think it's a really interesting example of how she really does actually interrogate it psychoanalytically, but also in a very literary way. She was very literary. She came from a very literary milieu. She was right at the heart of that. Second husband was a kind of published author and very well known. So she says, an eye doctor, 45 years old, in 1934. He says, the stormtroopers were putting barbed wire into the hospital windows. I had sworn I would never allow them to bring their barbed wire into my ward, but then I did allow it after all. I stood there like a caricature of a doctor as they knocked out the glass and turned my hospital room into a concentration camp with barbed wire. And even so, I lost my job. But I was summoned back to treat Hitler because I was the only one in the world who could. I was proud of myself for that, and I felt so ashamed of my pride that I started crying. And then that same night, he goes on to dream, I was in a concentration camp, but all the prisoners were being treated very well. There were dinner parties and plays being performed. I thought, well then, so it really is exaggerated, all the things you hear about the camps. Then I saw myself in a mirror. I was wearing the uniform of a concentration camp doctor, with special jackboots that sparkled like diamonds. I leaned against the barbed wire and started crying again. And she goes on to sort of analyze that, the idea of a sort of caricature that's looking in the mirror and seeing something that you don't recognize. And that is very much what she describes in the book as that way in which the regime invaded the unconscious and it kind of broke the will of people. It broke their spirit and they became isolated and alienated and sort of destroyed. And that kind of process then of that slow adaptation towards accepting and conforming to the regime. So all of those things, that sort of shame and shame and pride, the mix of those things, proud that he can heal Hitler, but the shame that he even is proud of that.
There's a real the book is organized in through the organization of the book is very interesting. So but she's finding sort of genres of dream. I mean, the way she has these nightmares, and she thinks if I'm having these nightmares under these conditions, probably other people are too. So she goes around asking people for their dreams. And some of them are shop workers, some of them are factory owners, some of them are, some of them are maths teachers, some of them are young, some of them are old. And she's finding nonetheless, there's sort of a family of dreams, that somehow, no matter who they are, under totalitarian conditions, they're sort of dreaming versions of the same dream, but in different, in different sort of narrative sort of constellations, and she's trying to group the narrative constellations together as the chapters in this book. And then in the final chapter of the book, which I found really interesting, she does the dreams of Jews, and here's what the Jews were dreaming, and that's its own sort of version of dreams. So actually, that was interesting. The story you just told of a sort of an eye doctor who dreams he's the one who can help Hitler. And then in the Jewish section, we get the Jewish doctor who dreams he can help Hitler. But his dream isn't that, oh no, I've become one of them. His dream, the Jewish dream, which you find repeated quite often, I think, in the Jewish section, is maybe I'm the exception to the rule. Maybe Hitler hates all other Jews, but we'll see that me or German Jews are different, one humiliating dream that reverberated for me is a dream is the erotic dream of Hitler, basically, is the dream that let me see if I can. Why do I have to pick this one? I didn't mean to come to this one, but I often dream about Hitler and Goering. He wants something from me, and I don't say, but I'm a respectable woman. Instead, I say, but I'm not a Nazi, and that makes him like me even more. And that feels like the dream of the individual, the dream of somebody who would like to be an individual, who would like their individuality proven. Maybe I'm the exception to the rule, and of course, actually, it maps on completely to stories. I'm addicted to sort of romance stories, to very cheap romantic. I'm embarrassingly addicted to these shows that they put on, where basically there's that guy and he's terrible to everyone, but not to her. She changes him, and she's the exception to the rule, and he's transformed, and the whole world is safe because she's the exception to the rule. And somehow that romantic tale is there in this dream in relationship to the Führer, to the Führer. So people are dreaming, you know, is there any way around this? What if my exceptional being, but again and again, you know, we're having in the dream, like in the dream you said, we're having stories in which people begin by thinking, well, I'm different to the rest. And by the end of the dream is evidence, is reporting back on them. No, you're not. Now you've lost, you're saying that both you and Charlotte were looking for your own voice in this. There's an amazing dream in this story in which someone thinks they're going to speak with their own voice, and by the end of the dream they realize they're only able to speak in a chorus with everybody else. So they're only able to sort of join up with the others. Did you feel that, I mean, because I suppose there's another tension in this book. There were dreams in which the dream seemed to be incriminating the dreamer. So the evidence would be the evidence against the dreamer. The dream is telling them, this is who you really are. You're no hero. You're actually absolutely complicit with an evil state. And then there's the dream, like perhaps some of the other dreams, in which the dream is letting the dreamer off. So by the end of the dream, the dream is saying, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do. So did you?
I think there are lots of those tensions, and I think they go to the heart of what it is like to be living in a state where this exterior force is bearing down on the populace. That at its core, I think, is our human need to belong, for acceptance, to be part of something, not to be different, not to be othered. And I think these dreams really explore that tension and describe it in a way that, you know, maybe a diary couldn't in the same way. So, you know, that sense of knowing something is wrong, actually feeling that sense of wanting to be part of it, perhaps, because perhaps that's easier. There's a quote in which he says, no, somebody's dreams, I dreamt I didn't have to say no anymore. And she says, I'm confused. Freedom is a burden, unfreedom a relief. So this idea that actually, when you capitulate, when you give in to this greater force that's pushing, it comes as a kind of relief, and I think that's the kind of central tension. And then, you know, everything else kind of, but you're kind of non-hero, you're a non-person. You sort of don't exist, your individuality. I mean, in so many ways, the regime is exercising both the kind of physical terror. I mean, literally on the streets are stormtroopers, and violence and banners and people disappearing. But the interior, the psychological terror that's being enforced, she calls it sort of dictated by the dictatorship, almost, but that kind of invasion that's happening, and it's where the real power is, because as she says, you know, the regime couldn't put listening devices into everybody's home or office or anything, but if they believe that there might be a listening device, and this is before listening devices even existed, so this is in their imagination, then they begin to terrorize themselves. And that, you know, in Arendtian terms, the sort of effacing of the boundary between truth and fiction, between private and the group, and between the kind of hunter and the hunted. So you begin to self-terrorize, you begin to self-censor, and then you've got a perfectly sort of conforming society, which is what totalitarianism is and works on that.
I mean, there's literally dreams in which the coffee pot is going to spill the beans. I mean, that the idea that the inanimate objects in your home might report on you becomes a real trope of what people are dreaming. And she makes the point, and this is before Orwell. This is one of the things that interests Charlotte, I think, is the fact that some of our great modernist writers, particularly Kafka, but also Beckett and Orwell, are in a way the authors of these dreams as well. In a way, I mean, that there is absolutely the Kafkaesque in every single. Pretty much every dreamer feels accused of something. They're not sure what it is, and they're not sure what they've done. But they're terrorized by the feeling that their guilt is somehow plain for everyone else to see, and they're taking every kind of precaution in order to not be guilty. But the thing they're worried that can be seen is their interior life. So there's an extraordinary dream of a woman who goes to see the magic flute performed, and every time
The chorus.
every time the chorus sings, she in her head, she associates the devil basically in her head, secretly in her head, with Hitler. But suddenly it becomes clear that this her free association has been noticed. has been noticed, and somehow so her free associations are terrorized. Even though these are in the interior life, and in her dream, the dream is outing her. Like they can all see what's going on on your inside.
The stormtroopers come and take her away at the sound of the word the devil. She thinks of Hitler, and they know that, and she imagines that there's a kind of a machine that can know what her inner thoughts are.
Well, there's a beautiful, and she's sort of, the whole audience is looking, she's looking around to see if there are any sympathetic faces here who will help save me from this sin of my own interior life. Surely somebody here, and the guy next to, they're all looking poker face. The guy next to her seems like he's friendly, but then suddenly that he's not, and he's part of, and it's like he spits at her, and she's completely and utterly alone in this horror story. But there's, I mean, in a way, those are the dreams that interest me most. Dreams in which the dream is about self-censorship. So the dreamer is dreaming about what they can do in order not to have their dreams revealed. Could you talk to some of those things?
Yeah, I think at one level, the idea of self-censorship is also about the breaking of human bonds, so that we can't trust each other, and then we begin to not trust ourselves. But the communication, which is, you know, the way that we can exist, that we can share this world, becomes this kind of a tool, and it's kind of weaponized by the regime, so that people who these motifs appear again and again: blank faces, expressionless, nobody there to help you, nobody going to look your way or share. This man spits at her, she looks at him, he looks kindly, she looks at him, he spits at her. So these ways in which shrill voices penetrating, the marching of stormtroopers, this expressionless mute faces, these appear again and again in the dreams, and that kind of the way in which you are really alone as part of the group, you are really alone, you're really on your own, and that isolation, again, Arendt talks about isolation and alienation. But yeah, to your point about how self-censorship it grips people. They are, the terror from outside has got inside, and they are self-terrorizing. So, you know, the woman dreams that the oven is barking orders. It's heard everything that the family has said. It knows everything the family said, and it's barking orders. And that sense in which even in the privacy of your home, there is nowhere that you are free to think is, it's a terrifying.
So one dream of, I think it's a young girl who has a nice sort of two angels above her bed, a sort of Catholic, a piece of Catholic iconography above her bed. And she dreams those angels are actually basically state surveillance, and that they're reporting, the angels are reporting on the fact that she's dreaming, because what you're not allowed to do is dream. And I mean, this is a child imagining that these sort of symbols that are meant to reassure her and make her feel protected are in fact turning against her. There's dreams in which the dreamer is accused of dreaming and is denying that, or is accused of writing down their dreams. I mean, there were dreams in which dreamers are accused of writing down their dreams. There are dreams in which dreamers try to dream of plausible deniability stories for themselves, so that whatever they know, they don't. Do you want to talk about that? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a woman dreams, she dreams that she dreams in Russian. And that's so that she can't understand herself. She doesn't, Russian is not a language she speaks. But the idea is that Charlotte's interpretation, her own interpretation, actually, because sometimes Charlotte reflects on what people said, this happened to me today. And so I think that's what came into my dream. And so she dreams in Russian, a language she doesn't speak. And the idea is so that she can't know what she herself is dreaming. It's like a sort of double bluff on the cell. So there's lots of kind of wordplay. There's lots of ways in which, I mean, I think for analysts, probably really interesting in terms of how these sort of residues of the day, but also the processing of the whole experience gets kind of played out in these singular, rather poignant moments of this life. And she talks about this, there being like the tesserae of a mosaic, like they all were snapshots of this system, the way in which together they all just build up to this big picture of what life was like. Life lived under a totalitarian state, and how the institutions, how propaganda was used so cleverly, so powerfully to kind of break the individual, break the spirit, and lead to conformity.
I mean, I think she is really. She seems a little judgmental to me of the dreamers. I mean, that there's very few exceptions for her of dreamers who aren't betraying their own weakness somehow through their dreams, that their dreams are reporting on them in the way that they fear that they're being recorded on in some strange way. Her own interpretation is an odd echo of some of the problems, perhaps. But she does make a sort of case for the resistors, for the heroic dreamers who are dreaming of resistance and haven't got this sort of end point where they're suddenly like, well, there's nothing you can do anyway, or I dreamt that no was no longer possible, and there is a kind of fluency to those dreams where movement is possible. But one of the most interesting resistance dreams was this. I wonder if I could just read this one out. This is a 50-year-old maths teacher had the following dream, and she makes a point later on that this woman was very boring in her daily life, very uninteresting, boring maths teacher. And here's what she dreamed. It was forbidden under penalty of death to write down anything to do with maths. I took refuge in a bar. Never in my life have I been to such a place. Drunks were swaying on their feet. The barmaids were half naked. The band was cacophonous and deafening. I took an extremely thin sheet of paper out of my bag and wrote down a couple of equations in invisible ink, deathly afraid.
Yes, it's a really, it's almost slight, but it's one of a few examples of resistance dreams. She has a whole chapter on resistance dreams, and that is the chapter that kind of makes me feel kind of. I realized after a while I was working, researching this, trying to make the film, getting the book published. I was like, what is the point? What am I doing? What is this all about? You know, and then I realized actually it's these resistance dreams that give me courage and hope and strength, actually. And they really helped to be kind of my own my own compass in these dark and difficult times where I just think I need to stay with what I know to be true. And I think there's a very long dream in here, which I think is Charlotte's dream, which has her, it's sort of full of, it's got 4 acts in it and has her running, it's very action packed, and ends up with her saying, we need, and all of it is her running, saying, we need to protest, we really need to protest. And this idea that, you know, need to hold on to those truths. And lots of people don't follow her, a few people follow her, but there's something very kind of inspiring, I think, and it sums up who she was actually as a person. She was in the resistance. She talks about the people who had a strong sense of purpose and objection, were also the people who had the least complicated, the most simple and straightforward dreams. They were less ambiguous, their dreams. They were very straightforward. And I find that kind of very hopeful. There's one dream here, which is you might know this, but Sophie Skoll, who was part of the White Roses, a young resistance leader, student resistance leader, in 1943, the night before she was executed. So she didn't tell Charlotte this truth, but she includes it in it. It's only one that's from outside. Sitting on her cot, she told her cellmate this. It was a sunny day, and I was carrying a baby in a long white dress to be baptized. The road to the church ran up a steep mountain, but I held the child tight, safe in my arms. Then suddenly a crevasse opened up right in front of me. I had...
Yeah.
Sorry. I had just enough time to put the child down on the other side. Then I fell into the chasm. The Skoll then explained the meaning of this simple dream to her fellow prisoner. The child is our idea, and it will prevail despite all obstacles. We can prepare the way for it, even though we will have to die for it before its victory. And you know, that's in a kind of concluding way. I think Charlotte always wanted this book to be both a warning and a lesson about totalitarianism, and I think it sort of stands as that, really, in a way. But this dream, even though, you know, wasn't told her, it's such a powerful dream, I guess. I think this Jungian life podcast, I don't know if you've heard it, but you know, it's used a lot, but I think it's very symbolic and, you know, powerful about resistance and the need for us to you know, to stay true to our ideals where we can.
I mean, it's in a way to recover the idea of the dream as in the utopian way in which that word so often functions in our vernacular, that you dream of a better world, of another way, and so these really are nightmares for the most part. I mean, the Third Reich of Dreams is for the most part the Third Reich of nightmares. But you know, because I am a bit Freudian, I am interested in, I think, I suppose, the psychoanalytic suggestion that all narratives, whether they are horrific or not, are organized in part by our desires, are organized in part by the way we want to tell ourselves the story of what we can bear to know and not know, here or not here. And certainly you get the impression of that in the stories in which the most terrible forms of conformity and complicity are a relief, and people are relieved of the burden of having responsibility by the totalitarian state, or dream the erotic dreams of being the exception to the rule, who therefore is a savior and so on. But these dreams that you're saying, in a way, recover the idea of the dream, are in a way the least dreamy, because they're so functional. I mean, they're so pragmatic. This is what we need to do, and these are the reasons we need to do it now. I realize time is ticking up, but I did want to bring in the degree to which these dreams are or aren't. In some ways, she says these dreams are not prophetic. They're not prophetic dreams. In fact, it's the dreamer during their day, during their waking life, who doesn't see reality, and they go to sleep, and the real conditions of the world are lucidly told to them. That's when they find out what's happening, not in the future, but now. But she does also suggest in other moments that these dreams are horrifyingly prophetic of the very near future, and particularly of the death camps, in which, for example, somebody's dreaming that they have no place to hide and they find a pile of corpses and they hide under those, and then that's described and it was bliss. So what I mean, do you think she feels these dreams? I mean, what do you think she feels these dreams are a prophecy to us in the future? I mean, does she think this collection is something we can use now?
I think, I don't know, she died in 1985. It was a time when Germany was beginning to come out of its own trauma. This book continues to be in print in German. It had fallen out of print in English, but this is its first a republication and translation since 85. I don't know if in that world you could have imagined we could be going back into something like that. I certainly, even, if I'd found this book 10 years ago, I don't know what I'd have thought. There was something about finding it just, Trump in the White House, the world turning. There was something in the air. There's something in the world was sort of turning on an axis. I think for those who came out of the war, there was that sense that this could happen again. This can happen again. People can be just, institutions can be destroyed. Democracies can be destabilized. It's all really fragile, and I think maybe we've taken a lot for granted over the years. And so, I think that the idea of prophecy is really closely aligned with the idea of imagination, isn't it? If you can imagine a device that reads minds, someone might imagine that and invent that. And if you can imagine a world where what we've come to take for granted is just, it's destroyed, someone can imagine destroying that or not caring for it. So I don't know if that makes sense, but just that sort of sense in which they're just like the worst of our projected thoughts, but with a kind of fertile imagination, we can imagine the worst. And I think, certainly the Jewish story is to keep sort of repeating these awful imaginings, even though she wasn't coming from that place. But I think the Jewish dreamers section is quite a sort of pitiful, but just it's quite painful reading. Makes for quite painful reading. There's somebody dreams that he goes, I think this might have been her husband's dream, he finds a place at the ends of the earth, and it's called the last place on earth where Jews are still tolerated. I mean, what a thing to dream in your dream. And that's what it's called. That's its name, It's like it's the worst of sort of projections somehow.
There's a Jewish dreamer who's sitting on a bench or something and wearing a sign that says, I'll make room. I'll move for the trash if it's needed to sit here instead of me, wearing a sign. And she says, "This was before Beckett wrote Endgame." I know that at this point I meant to open questions to the floor. As you can hear, there's just, you could go in any way with this material. And also just after the questions, I'm hoping we're going to show the taster of the movie that Amanda's going to make, which just I've seen. It's an absolute. It's just a little taster sort of trailer.
Yes,
for that.
3 minutes.
So we'll see the dreamscape of film as well. Can we move to questions?
I'm just going to grab one of the mics.
Thank you.
Wonderful conversation, thank you very much. I'm rather saddened by the idea of a judgmental attitude to those feelings. I would have thought one of the main things I carry through into the future is a sense that the mentality, the mind that we hold are that sort of mind that we are built for submission in a terrible way, which is a pessimistic thought. We need to have it to understand how to resist it. So I'm grateful to those people for their dream. They're evidence of who we are, I think.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. I think what this book illuminates is our fragility and how we can so easily, well, not easily, I mean, it was a very powerful and very brilliantly kind of conceived regime, even if it was a haphazard at times, but I mean, the propaganda machine and the theatre of it and the way that sort of seduced people. But I think you're right. I think that the capacity for humans to behave in that way we need to recognize that, and we need to recognize that in ourselves. And I think that's what's powerful about the book, is it? Yeah.
In a way, I think that in a way, the individual doesn't really exist for her. So because she's sort of saying this, she's also saying this is us. So in a way, the judgment is on us, even though she's one of the heroes, dreaming the heroic dream. I mean, I think she's saying, look at us, we're conformists, and we mustn't be. I mean, we mustn't be, and so there's a kind of desperation. But what I really think you feel from that, particularly that maths teacher dream, is that most of us perhaps have nothing where most of us have weak enough minds that we can be knocked either way to think just about anything. Very few of us have a truth to hold on to when propaganda, but a maths teacher does, actually. So a maths teacher knows something's true and it's been outlawed. And she's writing equations in invisible ink, and that is a kind of activism. There's something within all of this that I know to be true that I'm going to try and hold on to. But most of the people who she's interviewing don't seem to have lives where they have those truths, actually.
Well, it comes down to that. I mean, I don't know if anyone heard the Wreath lecture this morning. I just heard the beginning of it before I was leaving, and I can't even tell you exactly what it was about, but I know he started off by talking about kind of bystander culture and this idea that, who amongst us is brave enough to stand up and actually to face the consequence of resisting. I'm watching American politics of the last, in 10 months or whatever, and just seeing, I mean, I know I read the New York Times, but seeing people kind of standing up and calling it out and being brave enough. I mean, I went to America recently. I deleted all Facebook, my everything, and I sort of felt a bit of a coward doing that, actually. But I wanted to go and do my thing in America, so I was just like, but so that felt kind of cowardly of me to not stand up for what I believe in, speak my truth, but so
It's massive in order to get
massive in order to go and talk about the book.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, questions?
Can I get time?
Yeah.
Sorry. I want to come back on this because I'm not convinced at all. I'm a Freudian person as well. I'm not convinced at all that a dream of action is an action. It's not an action. It may be exactly the opposite of an action. It may be an embracing of non-action. And the person who dreams some of those terrible dreams of submission that you described is a confessor. They are holding a truth for themselves, actually. And I think there must have been millions of people who had no dreams during this period, whatever. And they're the ones who are the bystanders, not these perceptive and rather tortured individuals who have these nightmarish dreams, I think.
So the dream of action is a dream of non-action. Can you say more about that?
Well, I mean, I've dreamt many a rescue dream myself, actually, as a child, when I would go up to the top of a ladder and rescue a little girl from a burning building, and then die, and then have a wonderful funeral arrangement spoken for me. I didn't do those things. I wouldn't do those things. And any time I've been faced with such a thing, I haven't done it. So the guy who is writing out the maths equation is hoping for something that he doesn't think he can do.
I think in the case of this book, the resistors are resistors in life, aren't they? So, yeah.
Oh, right.
Not the maths,
Not the maths teacher. That's a slightly different. She doesn't put that in the resistance section. That's the one sort of resistance dream that appears elsewhere, where the resistance is just holding on to the truth. But even for yourself in invisible ink. But in her resistance, she somehow finds those who are taking action in life, in a way, are just are having dreams of action. Yeah, having active dreams. I mean, it was a psychoanalytic kind of theory would be that you're plagued by the feelings when you're not acting. I mean, when acting is thwarted, when your capacity to act is thwarted in some way. And so actually those dreams perhaps do feel a bit less feeling and less full of the feeling that you're admiring in the other dreams.
There is a afterword by Bruno Bettelheim in the 1968 first English edition. And Bettelheim sort of tries to take on that idea that he takes on the idea that dreams are often about that acting out of some sort of heroic or something that we might not do in real life, but it gives us the kind of courage or that sense in which we can stand up to a bully or whatever. And what he says, what's evident in these dreams for him, is that there are so many instances of people not really being able to do that, sort of capitulating, that they don't rise up and sort of punch. There's only one dream of tyrannicide, where somebody tries to lasso Hitler and drop him into the ocean. That's the only dream she came across of somebody trying to, and that was dreamt from outside Germany, from someone who had escaped. So
that's such an amazing moment. She says they were in Prague, so they were free to dream. I mean, that in fact, when you're in the totalitarian state, you couldn't dream of taking vengeance, and in Prague you could. It's just an amazing. That is evidence, isn't it? Yeah.
In a way, yeah. And also, I think one of the things I take away from this is this sort of sense that it was a constant sort of bombardment of, radio. Radio played a huge part. Some might know this. I didn't know this, but Goebbels recognized early on the power of radio, and it was a really cheap way to reach people. And they ordered millions and tens of millions of sets, and they had them everywhere in the lobbies of apartments, obviously in apartments, in offices, everywhere people went. They could not escape the regime kind of blaring at them. And that sort of, I mean, it's like a sort of torture, isn't it? It's sort of like waterboarding or something. So this idea of shrill voices, that constant oppressive voice telling you how to think, how to be, and how to be adoring of Hitler. It was sort of inescapable, really, I think.
I was just going to say, you mentioned the ring story at the beginning, and I think it is quite a fun story.
Oh, yeah.
to tell
Yeah.
about it.
So this ring, well, I was just saying, people often ask me how I found the story, and I often say I think the story sort of found me, really, in the way I mentioned that Elizabeth Gilbert talks in this book, Big Magic, about ideas finding you, and then you either run with them, and I feel like I have. But I did get to the point with this film. I mean, it's accidental that I published this book. I was researching Charlotte's story. I was introduced to someone who said he had the English rights. And I just wanted to talk to him about, did he meet her? How did he have the rights, etc. It turns out he lived a few streets away from me, London. And he said, yes, I got the rights, but I think I lost them. I threw them away. He's called Robin Shohet, by the way. He's a psychotherapist and was writing a book about dream sharing in the 80s when he came across her book. And he wrote to her and asked her if he could have the right, if he could publish it. She said, yes, she gave him the right. So 40 years on, I'm chatting to him. He said, I've lost the rights. I don't know where they are. Thrown them away or got rid of them. So I'm like, okay. I put the phone down and I thought, I just like, who does that? I'm sure he hasn't thrown them away. I'm sure he's filed them. So when we met later, when we came out of lockdown, I said, could you just look for the rights? And he said, and he met me and he said, I found them and here, and he gave them to me. He said, you have them. You do something with it. I'm not going to. So, that was an amazing moment of Charlotte's life coming, me bringing her back into the world, her voice. But the ring, last summer I was on a residency at the Jewish Film Institute in San Francisco, and I'd had a tough day with just tough business day. And I went to bed that night. I looked up at the rafters. I said, Charlotte, if you're up there, give me a sign that I should carry on with this film, because I'm just about done. I'm so over it. And the next morning, the phone rang. First thing, the phone rang. Producer friend in London said the BBC had commissioned a radio documentary, which we are now making, will be for Holocaust Memorial Day next January. And that was like, great, that's maybe that's a sign, And then I jumped in a taxi and I went down to Stanford, where I met with some of Charlotte's friends who are very eminent academics, president of Stanford and been dean of Chicago Law School, and Regina Kaspar is a psychiatrist, and they hosted me for lunch and we talked about Charlotte, and I saw the armoire which had come from Berlin, where she must have written these dreams up. By New York, was now in their home in Stanford. But as I was leaving and the taxi was waiting for me, she said, I've got something I want to show you. And I said, okay. I waited and she's running around the house. Look, she couldn't find it. Eventually, she brings out this jewelry box and she says, here we are. This is Charlotte's ring. I want you to have it. She would want you to have it. And so here it is. I'm wearing it, and I wear it wherever I go when I talk about her. So she's here with us in the room somehow. But I got in the taxi on the way back to San Francisco and I was like, wow, I think that might be a sign. I said to my friends on this, is that a sign? Everyone was like, yeah, I think that's a sign. So
I love that story.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. No,
It's
that story absolutely needed telling. Also very dreamy. A very something about spending your time. I find it really interesting how I think there's nothing more interesting than dreams, and how boring people find dreams.
I know.
If people tell you their dreams, you can just sort of see their eyes. Their eyes glaze over. There's something about dreams that people, really do defend themselves against dreams, I think.
Yeah.
So something in them tells them that I don't want to hear your dreams. But actually, we go around the day making out like with these people, and then at night those things happen, and clearly that's the interesting stuff about us. And I really wanted that to be present in a discussion in a life writing group, because as narratives of our lives, of our inner lives, dreams are absolutely extraordinary, because they do report on us that we are clueless about ourselves, and that we are really strangely composed beings. And this book has, apart from the fact that it is a report on the Third Reich and what it is to live under totalitarianism, makes dreams really fascinating.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there's a bit of a resurgence in interest in dreams. I mean, it could be just like kind of, aware, but I think more and more people are sort of getting into the dream space and finding it interesting again. Dreams used to be used, they would be used in courts, in Lancashire and in mining communities. They would use dreams as evidence. People might say, I had a dream that there was going to be an accident in the mine, and then that would be used in courts as evidence. So they were told and they were shared much more readily. I think the advent of cinema and Freud, I think cinema, it became somebody else's dream, sort of projected, we all indulge in. But yeah, I hope for a resurgence in dream theory. And
I mean, I can see in that, I didn't know at all about this thing than in legal cases. They were, but I mean, I can see there why that would be questionable evidence, because people can, of course, make up dreams.
Sure.
But here, everyone who's sharing their dreams is afraid to do so. And so here, they want their identities disguised, the dreams, and on the whole not making them look very good. And so here it does feel like a kind of historical evidence.
yeah,
It's an extraordinary. Thank you so much for getting this into the. Some more. We have time, I think, for some more questions, and then I'd like you to introduce the film work that you're doing. Yeah.
Hi, and thank you very much for a really interesting talk. I was wondering if, since this is a Jewish Women's Voices event, if anything came up between the differences between the dreams of men and the dreams of women. And obviously, generally in society, but especially in totalitarianism, gender roles were very well defined. And I was wondering if there were differences that emerged in potentially how women and men imagined agency, what their fears were, what their hopes were, and if gender potentially played a strong role in what their dreams under this system were.
That's a really interesting question. I've not really broken it down in so many different ways, but I haven't broken it down, especially except in the dreams around sort of erotic dreams of, she calls them erotic, the dreams of Hitler, which are that anyway, Hitler was a very charismatic leader, and he was particularly appealed to men in lots of ways, but they kept him single. And there were all sorts of ways in which he was this kind of poster boy for the Nazi regime, and women, you can see footage of that kind of adoring adulation of him, that kind of, like seeing the Rolling Stones or so, like women literally fainting. Sorry, it's a terrible analogy. There's no good analogy, but and so the way that the dreamers report that sense of being caressed, dancing, being wanting to be accepted, loved, held. There are so many of those dreams that she includes them because I think she recorded lots and lots of that from women. So I think that tension between knowing that he was who he was and what he represented, and yet still wanting, she describes it one dream where the woman he's stroking her hair and he's also handing her a leaflet. I think it was like he says the right hand knew what the left hand was doing. There was always control and manipulation happening. So I think that's the only thing I can really think.
There's also I think she says that the race laws, the race laws, non-Jewish women start dreaming that if they've got brown hair, that it's going to so non-Jewish women who have any kind of features that might make them look Jewish in the eyes of the law are provoked into real anxiety dreams about being called Jewish. And she says this is exclusive to women who have a lot more pressures on them to look a certain way in any case than men. And so when there's laws that appear about how you're meant to look, the women internalize those laws immediately and start dreaming accordingly.
Thank you for knowing the book so well.
Yes,
Yes, there's a whole section about women, mostly women, almost exclusively women, dreaming that, because of the shape of their nose, because of, they might always be carrying their genealogy fold, or they might go to a sort of a fictional bureau of Aryan identification to prove that they are in fact not Jewish and so not guilty. There's a really tragic set of 4 dreams where a young woman who's half Jewish, in lots of ways, dreams in lots of different scenarios, but one of them, she's carrying her mother, they're fleeing together. Her mother's Jewish, and she's running with her, and eventually she puts her over her shoulder and she runs and runs, but she becomes very, very heavy, and she puts her down and realizes that she's dead. She's been carrying a dead body, and she is relieved to not have to have that burden of a Jewish mother. And yeah, it's kind of, it's quite tragic. I thought it's all sort of, I mean, there's real tragedy in that, and there's real sort of pathos, it's really extreme way to have been living and dreaming.
There's a question here.
Thank you so much. That was so fascinating. I'm excited to read the book. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about her methods of collection, as you both have talked about the confessional aspect. I'm interested in how people were thinking about telling their own stories and how she got these people to reveal this very personal interior story.
Well, she says it wasn't easy. You'll see it in the little film in a moment. She said it wasn't easy. People were reluctant to share even their dreams. It was subversive. The idea of dream collecting was subversive. Also, Charlotte was on the watch list of the Nazis. She had been arrested as a suspect as in the Reichstag fire, and she had joined the resistance. So she had to really try and avoid detection. She would sometimes ask people, she would relate a dream. She'd say, oh, somebody told me a dream the other day, and she'd relate that dream. And then sometimes people would then say, oh, I had a dream. So they would share. She also enlisted the help of a doctor friend who could more easily ask people about their dreams in a consultation. And that's how she collected the dreams around 300 people. She says the dreams that the people she didn't ask and wouldn't have shared with her were Nazis, people who were supporting the regime, because that obviously wasn't safe, but it would be kind of interesting to know what those people were dreaming. But that was her kind of method, if there was a method. I think it's sort of after the fact and look at it, but I think at the time, it was something she did ban from working, a curious journalist, time on her hands. That was her sort of way to sort of fill some of her day, I guess.
Did she not also, the first dream in the book, sort of use that as a sort of calling? So she would, maybe you can read that first dream, because it sets up the book. And
yeah.
For her, it really sets up the book. This is what the book is about, this particular dream, she's saying. But she's saying this dream seemed like a kind of catalyst for other dreamers. She would tell them, this guy told me this dream. Maybe it helped he was a high status guy. And then they would start sharing their dreams on the basis of this dream.
Okay. So she says, Mr. S, about 60 years old, the owner of a mid-sized factory, had a dream in which no one touched him physically, and yet he was broken. He says, Goebbels came to my factory, and he had all the employees line up in 2 rows, left and right, and I had to stand between the rows and give a Nazi salute. It took me half an hour to get my arm raised, millimeter by millimeter. Goebbels watched my efforts like a play, without any sign of appreciation or displeasure. But when I finally had my arm up, he spoke just 5 words. I don't want your salute. Then he turned round and walked to the door. So there I was in my own factory, amongst my own people, pilloried with my arm raised. The only way I was physically able to keep standing there was by fixing my eyes on his clubfoot as he limped out. I stood like that until I woke up. He keeps having this repeating dream, and each time he's sort of more and more broken until in the end his spine breaks. He literally becomes a sort of spineless character without a core.
So yeah, when the factory owner dreams that his spine breaks, then everybody else can open up about their dreams. that seems that seems to be the thing. I don't know. I'm aware that it's coming to the end, and you're going to introduce this thing. So there's so many directions we could travel with this book, and I know that it's a real temptation to read it prophetically. But I sorry, I don't know your name, but this point that I mean that then perhaps there were dreamers for whom action was possible. They knew what the action to do was. They'd run out of options, and they knew what to do if they were going to resist. I'm not sure we know what to do. So at this point in time, I think many of us are very frightened by the way the political winds are blowing, and I think this book is evidence of some kind. But I don't think it's evidence of what we need to do or how we need to act. I don't think we know, but I think it is evidence that we should notice our dreams and take and really pay very special attention to our dreams to see what's really going on inside us and to us, and how we're being modified and adapted by our political environment. And I'm really, really grateful to you for bringing this into the world for us. And also, can you introduce the film you're making? Sure. And we're not going to put the film on the recording though.
No. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for sharing Charlotte's work so widely. There's a great foreword by Dunya Michal, who was a dissident Iraqi journalist, Iraqi-American journalist, who we were fortunate to wrote this preface for us. She says at the end of this really beautiful, poetic, I think, foreword, she says, "Tell me your dreams, and I'll tell you the world you live in." Yeah, tell me your dreams, and I'll show you the world you live in. There's very beautiful, but a call to dream, to share our dreams.